Hi, I'm Crystal, the parenting coach. Parenting is a thing that some of us just expected to know how to do. It's not like other areas of your life where you go to school and get taught, get on-the-job training, or have mentors to help you. But now you can get that help here. I believe that your relationship with your children is one of the most important aspects of your life and the best way that you can make a positive impact on the world and on the future. I've made parental relationships my life study, and I use life coaching tools, emotional wellness tools, and connection-based parenting to build amazing relationships between parents and their children. If you want an even better relationship with your child, this podcast will help you. Take my parenting quiz at the link in the show notes. Once we know what your parenting style is, we will send some tips tailored to you and a roadmap to help you get the most out of my podcast. Welcome to today's podcast episode, Creating Healthy Teen Brains, Tech, Phones, and Social Media with Kaylee Lowe. With so much research out there around tech and teens, how do you decipher about what to listen to? And how do you make healthy choices for your family and teach your kids screen regulation in fear-free ways? Join Kaylee and I on the podcast this week as we converse all about what the research is saying and how not to get bogged down by all the information, but to use it to empower yourself and your children. In this episode, we talk about Kaylee's story about cell phones and kids as her son started asking for a cell phone in middle school, what current research shows about kids, tech, and social media, and what is happening in their brains, how to make healthy and fear-free boundaries around tech and kids and not get overwhelmed by all the information and research out there, taking small steps to change things in your home. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast episode. This is a highly anticipated episode as screens and tech and social media and teens is something that people ask me about like nonstop. It's a question that gets asked and tossed around Instagram all the time. I feel like when parents get together, they talk about it all the time. And there's just so much information out there that it can be really hard to dissect what to do about all of this. So I am bringing on my friend Kaylee. And do you want to just go ahead and maybe introduce yourself for a minute, and then we'll dig into our conversation?
Sure. So like you said, my name is Kaylee. I have been married to my husband, Mike, for 18 years. We have 4 kids. Our oldest is in grade 9, he's 14. And then we have a 12-year-old, a 9.5-year-old, and a 7-year-old. We live in Southern Alberta. We live pretty normal lives, just an imperfect family, trying to do our best parenting for kids.
Yeah. So the reason I wanted to have you on, Kaylee, is because I love what you share on social media about tech. And why don't you tell us, before we talk about that, I would love to know what your own personal story is with your kids and social media, technology, cell phones. How did that play out in your family?
So I guess my story around tech would start when our oldest was in grade 4, probably the end of grade 4. And he started to notice his peers getting cell phones. That's when he kind of was conscious of it. And by grade 5 is when he started asking for a cell phone. And at that time, I wasn't naive to the risks of being exposed to pornography from people that I knew. And so I just kind of had this gut feeling that he was too young, that the timing wasn't right. And at that point, my answer was just kind of like, no, I don't think so. But there wasn't a conversation. It was just like, no. And shortly after that was when Colin Karchner came to town, and I'd heard about him. He'd been doing a few parent nights. And I remember life was like really busy that week, but I really felt like we needed to make it a priority. And so my husband and I went to his presentation, and that was probably the first time where I felt like that gut feeling, there was research to back it up. Like, oh, I'm not just making this up, that this isn't a great idea. And it ignited in me this desire to want to get educated about it and do this the right way at the right time and try and not mess this up, basically. And so after that, I started to dive into some books and some research. My background is as a registered nurse. And so I think the health science side of it, learning about the brain and the effects of that screens can have on the brain was surprising to me, but also really interesting. So I started to dive into that. And then once that started to happen, I think is when, as I got more educated, our conversations shifted with our kids, and it turned more into an actual discussion, an actual conversation to educate them more and to figure out as a family why you were doing this and what it would look like. So another really helpful resource that I found was Andrea Davis's book, I don't want to mess up the name, Creating a Tech Healthy Plan. And so her book is it's like 10 mini lessons, conversations you can have with the family. And she's got all these great little questions. You can adapt it to how you want with your family, but you can work through that to come up with your own boundaries as a family, whatever you want that to look like. So we just kind of started on this journey of learning more and having more conversations. And it shifted from being like, no, to when do you feel like you would need one? What would be the purpose in using it? In what ways would it be a tool for you? What would you need it for? And we had more discussions, and it turned into more of a not yet. We don't know exactly when that day is, but we know that right now it's not the right timing. And I understand that for a lot of people, I really think there isn't like a set age where it's the right time for every kid. I think every kid's a little bit different, and I think every family situation is different. So, if I have friends where their daughters are babysitting kids at 13 and they go to someone's house and they have no phone to use, I can see why a parent would want them to have access to a phone. So it really depends on the situation. But I think what I've really learned is that in a lot of areas of life, we teach kids in stages and we help them along to get from point A to point B. When tech came out, I think as a whole, we weren't really aware at that time what we were getting ourselves into, adults, kids, any of us. And so I do think as a whole, we are getting wiser about it and more aware of its effects, positive and negative. But in tech, in the beginning, we just handed it all over. There was no taking it in stages, taking it in steps. And so I really think about it a lot as like getting a driver's license. If I had my 9-year-old kid, the car keys, she will get in a crash, guaranteed. She doesn't have a brain that's developed enough. She doesn't have enough life experience. She's physically not big enough to drive the vehicle. And so as my kid gets older, they learn more responsibility, their brain develops more. My 14-year-old, he has to take a test. And if he can't pass that test, he doesn't get his learner's license. Once he does pass the test and he's driving now, an adult has to be in the seat beside him to drive the car for a couple of years. And then you have to pass another test. So I'm not saying you have to have your kids write a test, but like in life with getting a phone or using technology, I think sometimes we've missed the boat on seeing it as a process that they learn along with us and we guide them along, and they get it, more of it as they grow and as they reach more, they're more accountable, more responsible. And we see it as more of a process to get them there. So I think that's kind of how our family's shift happened in it, going from, no, I don't think so, to, oh, we got to learn. Let's have more discussions. Let's work through this as a family. And honestly, every time we had the conversation, when I would ask what he felt he needed a phone for, we came back around to the beginning of him saying, you know what, I actually don't need one right now. Like, it was really, he was part of that conversation and that decision. And now in grade 9, for the first time, we've, as a family, felt like, okay, I do feel like he's more responsible. He is getting older. And it's, again, Andrea Davis actually on her website and through her book, if you buy the book, she has like little worksheets you can go through to see how responsible you're getting. Like, it sounds silly, but when you have a 12-year-old boy, like, one of the questions is like, do I practice personal hygiene on my own, like simple things like that. So this year now we are looking at a phone option that will be a family cell phone that's simply talk and text, that we can decide which actual phone numbers can contact him and whether or not they can send pictures, and start it in a baby step stage. So it's literally a talk and text when he needs to take one, and start there. And because I also feel that saying no tech ever to our kids, it doesn't help them in the real world. The reality is
they move out and they're like
tech. What
do they do?
Yeah. So I just wanted to see it more as preparing my child for adulthood, just like we would with other things. They need to learn how to do laundry. They need to learn how to cook. And so, I think that's
I love all that. So my story is pretty similar in that I just decided like we were just going to wait until we needed it. So when they were little and asked, I would just say no. Cause of course they want they want all the things when they're little that they're trying to have, right? So it was easy. It was an easy no. And as we started to have more conversations about it, it did become more of a like, what is it that you feel like you need it for? And it usually did come back to like, I guess I probably don't need it right now. So my 17-year-old and almost 15-year-old don't have phones. But when they go out to places, they'll take my cell phone. Their friends will text my cell phone. They have emails so people can contact them. They did say that people think it's really weird when they're like, can I text you? And they're like, well, yeah, you can, but like, you could just email.
It's my mom's phone.
And they're like, email me. Like nobody emails.
Totally.
I definitely think that there's been times where they felt like they've been left out because of lack of having a cell phone. And so that's something really helpful to balance also as before we left on this big trip that we're going on, we started having a lot of more conversations about it because my son's working now. He's, practicing for his driver's license, things like that. And so he's like, I really think that I need one. And I also feeling more like he's getting left out in different situations. And so I think that one of the things you said that's so important is collaboration. And obviously when you're little, you're not going to collaborate as much. It's like if I took my kid into a candy store, they'd probably want to eat all of the candy. And I'm not just going to be like, oh, okay, because you want it, you can eat as much as you want.
Yes.
But when they start to get older, I think it's really important to have those kind of collaborative conversations. And that's what I really loved about your reels. I want you to talk for a minute to us about the reels that just went viral on Instagram. Man. I love what you said in there about your son and about him actually seeing those things for himself, because I think that's a really important step with this collaborative conversation.
Yes. Yeah. So the reel that went viral, I never saw that coming actually at all. As background, I wasn't on social media when I had 2 little kids. I was like, I'm kind of done with this. I'm going to see what life's like without it. And I took a 10-year break and I loved it and had zero intention of coming back to social media. I could talk on a separate whole podcast episode about the benefits of walking away from social media.
I love that. Yes.
And so it's funny to see some of the comments on there about, what I'm putting things on social media and it's hypocritical and whatever. But it's funny because when I started learning all about this, I really started to feel this nudging feeling like you got to find a way to teach more parents about this. Like we got to create more awareness, help make a difference in our schools, in my kids' friends, families, in our community. It really has been a focus on our little community and who I'm trying to reach. And so I kept coming back to, you got to start an Instagram account to start sharing some of this research. Like where else in our world right now can I instantly give information to people? And so I have a lot of actual strict boundaries around my Instagram use. So I take Sundays, usually every Saturday off, don't go on it at all. I don't go on Instagram until, for me, I've taken care of my mind and my body. So I make sure I've exercised and I've read my scriptures. I have a 15-minute time limit on my app when I'm going through other people's Instagram pages, keep that scrolling to a minimum. And I really try to just use it as a way to share information. And so in my head, I thought, if I have 500 followers, like that's awesome. If 500 parents showed up to a presentation I was doing, that's a packed house. Like you don't get that many people. So I've never had this intention of being like, oh, I want to just, go crazy on Instagram. So that video has actually hit 5 million views now. And I can't really comprehend that digit actually, but so that video, I posted that because I just really wanted people to see the progression of how it does take time and it's a process. And I think a question that I get a lot from that reel actually is people saying like, how do you make it so your kids don't feel left out? Because he was the only kid in a class of 36 kids without a cell phone. It was lonely. It was during going back to school during COVID restrictions also. So he couldn't even talk to people if their masks were off when they're eating lunch. Like it was a hard year. And that was the year when it shifted for me. When I'd hear about what was happening in their classroom, all the kids pulling out a cell phone at lunchtime and they can't talk to each other because the mask is off. And it wasn't like, I did feel bad for our son. Like I knew it was hard, but that's when it hit me thinking about what are we doing to a generation? What is going to happen 5 years down the road for these kids if they haven't learned to be uncomfortable and talk to somebody and look them in the eyes? And when they haven't learned how to connect with each other, if we're resorting to a phone whenever we're feeling lonely or bored or
and just be with themselves by themselves in restlessness, right? Like that's what we're trying to get rid of that. We're just like, well, we don't ever want to do that, right? You sit in the doctor's office now and you look around and every single person has their phone out. Like there's no moment of the first time that I really got into this tech conversation is when I read a book about 10 years ago called Reclaiming Conversation. And this is exactly what she talks about, where she's like, this is how it's changing our lives and our relationships. And she doesn't give a lot of like, this is what you can do about it. But it was really eye-opening for me just to start acknowledging and being aware of like where I was at and also how it was affecting my interactions with people.
Oh, and what I think is interesting, what I really didn't anticipate was by grade 7, he didn't ask for a cell phone anymore. I think we as a family had done more to get educated and to make it just a conversation that's always on the table, really, not a one and done. That he got to a stage where when you've been growing up with kids, you start to see a difference in some of them. And he would notice that some of them seemed more anxious or less happy or less engaged in whatever they were doing or whatever was going on around them. So it was interesting to see that shift happened on his own. And then by grade 8, when we were talking about cell phones again, driving somewhere, he was the one that made the comment like, I'm actually really glad I haven't had a cell phone during middle school. And I was just kind of like, whoa, like that's really, did you just say that? Because it has been hard. And when parents ask, I guess coming back to what I was saying before, when they ask like, how do I help my child to not feel lonely? I wish there was a way to do that. But I honestly, right now with where things are at, I think that's just part of it. Anytime you're trying to walk a path less traveled, you're going to be a bit lonely. But not only that, he was also left out of cyberbullying. He was left out of the exposure to online predators. He was left out of this pressure that social media can put on kids when you have an account. Like I asked him not long ago what he felt like the benefits were not having social media or a cell phone through middle school. And he said, I didn't have the weight of the world in my pocket. Like he just doesn't have the same weight that kids carry when there's this pressure to look a certain way or be a certain way, or especially with social media. So
that was so astute of him to notice and acknowledge that. And that's why I wanted to bring up your reels, is because I love that he started to see that. And I think that is another key component. I would say number 1, collaboration. And number 2 is to help them see. What is happening outside of myself? What is happening with other people? And then once they start to get the cell phone, to help them notice what happens inside of them. Because I know when I've had too much screens, like my whole mood dampens. I'm more irritable. I feel like, I don't know if lazier is the word, but like lack of motivation. Like I don't have as much desire. My creativity isn't there. And I can tell the difference because I've done both. Like, and we want to teach our kids how it feels for them, right? How they can't learn regulation if they don't know how it feels, which is why eventually they are going to have to, figure out how to deal with this. But like you said, like, I think it's such an individual thing, because I have kids that are neurodiverse, and I know for my neurodiverse kids, they have a much harder time with impulse control and with regulation around anything, including their own emotions, and for sure around screens. If I was just like, here, do whatever you want on the computer all day, they would just sit and watch like 90-second YouTube clips for like 12 hours until they not feed themselves, right? Like it's definitely a personal thing.
Yeah. And I think you've touched on two big things that I really learned. And the first one is the brain development. Like our kids literally haven't developed their frontal lobe enough to make all the decisions they need to make properly. It's not there yet. And so remembering that they are growing still. And the second piece, when you're talking about regulation, is the dopamine. Our bodies naturally make dopamine. But when we have a natural dopamine hit, like if I love eating chocolate cake, there's a process that my body goes in where if I'm making the chocolate cake, it's a gradual incline. I can smell it baking. I eat it. I taste it. I digest it. And you naturally have an incline and a decline of our dopamine. And what happens with screens, whether it's a toddler on an iPad, a kid scrolling social media, an adult social media, whoever, video gaming, these interactive touch screens, we get instant and high hits of dopamine, instant. And so in Glow Kids, the research that Dr. Carderis shares, a video game from 1998 has an increase of dopamine the same amount as intercourse. It's 100% increase of dopamine. So that's an old video game. So when you start putting it into context of how much dopamine we're getting, and if we're playing for hours, let's say video games, our body goes into a state of fight or flight. In a natural situation, if I'm walking through the park and a dog jumps out and starts chasing me and I go into fight or flight, I have an expenditure of energy. My body physically moves. I expend energy. The hormones drop again, and it's natural process. The screens are giving us this instant high hits of dopamine. We go into fight or flight mode. So regulation, you take the screen away, and that's why we're seeing a literal withdrawal when kids are whiny, sad, angry, crying. It's withdrawal. And so that was another big eye-opening piece for me, was just how the body actually works. And what the screens, our brain doesn't know if it's in fight or flight, if we're sitting and playing a video game or actually physically running, right? The fight or flight response is the same.
It's the same.
And so if our kids are in a constant or for hours regularly every day in this dysregulated state, it's no wonder it's hard for them to sit in school. Or this is why they get tired of playing with their friends in real life, or they don't want to play sports anymore. They don't want to do anything because it's not exciting anymore, because that dopamine, they're getting such a high hit of dopamine from the tech that they're not getting the same amount of dopamine from the regular things that they used to love doing. So those are kind of two big pieces.
Yeah. One of the books that I read when I was also doing the same kind of research was Reset Your Child's Brain by Dr. Victoria
Dunkley.
And she had so many good anecdotal examples of exactly what you're saying, and and also just research based, like what's happening inside their brain and with their eyes and all of that as they're playing video games. And so what I was seeing with my kids, especially the neurodiverse kids, is that they just had no ability to regulate themselves afterwards, also like spending too much time on video games, which for them wasn't even very much. Like even a small amount of time would really dysregulate them. So we, at that point, sold our iPads and sold our video game systems. And kids were so sad about it. But honestly, it's never even it hasn't even been a thing again. Like it's been years. I don't even remember how many years. I think it was in 2017, maybe. So it's been like 6 years. And every once in a while, the kids bring up like the video game thing. They're like, well, it'd be so nice to play video games. Or we'll like, borrow one from somebody for a week for somebody's birthday or something. But it's just not something that we have in our lives anymore. And even though I see like, it would be fun to have, like you said, the like lonely factor with cell phones, the same thing happens with video games. Like, like it would be nice to play and interact with their friends for sure. But it's not worth the risks that I saw specifically for my own individual kids. Like I could look at them and see how much it was affecting them. And obviously all kids are different. Like my oldest at that time and still now probably wouldn't be affected nearly as much. He could probably really handle a lot more. But because it's like a whole house, a whole family thing, we just don't have it anymore. And it is a little bit different in my situation in that we are homeschooling. So we're at home more, and a lot of homeschooling families have similar values. And so it's, it's usually them messaging each other on their parents' like Facebook message or their parents' cell phone text or whatever. So it's not as awkward because they're all doing the weird, awkward thing. So it's been fine for us, but it really has been beneficial for us to have this length of time and really to help teach our kids, like, how do you feel around screens? What do you feel like before? What do you feel like during? What do you feel like after? What is your sleep like? What is your mood like? And sometimes I'll do this like emoji scale of like 1 to 10 with like a really angry emoji and like a sad whatever, and like have them circle like, okay, well, I just did it. And especially with my teenagers, I'll sit down and say, well, how much screens do you want this week? Because we have to use screens. Like there's so much on education and learning with screens, right? So it's like, how much do you think you want this week? What do you want it to look like? What boundaries do you want to set? And then I just help them do that. I'm not sitting there like, like forcing them to do or not do things, but I'm helping them to really make those boundaries themselves and see how they feel after.
Well, what's interesting is that maybe you found this as well. As you cut back and became more intentional with how you're using them, I found, and it sounds like you found as well, that they didn't want them as much. Like it got easier. And so I think like that's an awesome example of what your family did. It's hard in the beginning, but for parents to know that like it does get better, it does get easier, and kids will get so creative and start to come up with a lot more on their own. That won't be the first thing that comes into their head as soon as they're like, oh, I'm bored. I want to game, or I want to, sit at a screen. They will get more creative and
And I see that even in and off with my kids. Like I do screen resets now ever since we read Reset Your Child's Brain.
Yes.
So when I start to notice like that they're getting into that, like I'm bored. I have nothing to do. All I want to do is watch TV. I'm like, okay, we need a little reset, and we'll go do a reset. And it's not just about taking away. It's about what are you doing instead, right? It's like, we'll go on a little trip, or we'll spend more time outside, or we'll craft, or we'll whatever, play games together. But what I would love to know before we part today is, I feel there's this dichotomy of like, almost like too much information for us, that it makes us feel afraid ourselves as parents. And then we take all this information and then we're more controlling and more coercive and more shame-based in the way we teach it to our kids, versus like not knowing anything at all and just like letting our kids do whatever because we're not empowering ourselves with knowledge. So how do you find that gap of like, I do want to learn and I want to be armored with this, information, but I also don't want it to make me then make my decisions from this energy of fear or shame or guilt?
I think that's a really tricky balance to find. And I think it might also, it shifts probably from what's going on and where you're at with life. But the first thing that comes to my mind is just really, at first my kids are like, oh, you don't like screens, you hate screens, you're against screens, as I started to learn, because you do, as you start to learn, or at least for me, there is a bit of fear. You're like, holy man, have I messed them up? Like, did I seriously mess this up? So a bit of guilt, maybe some shame, as you do start to learn, or as I started to learn. But then to actually, I think going back to seeing it as a process instead of an all or nothing, being conscious of making sure that we remember that we're using it as a tool. Technology is amazing, and what we can do with it is so helpful. And it's okay sometimes for your screen to be a break. Like, I don't think aimlessly scrolling is great, but when you like intentionally are like family movie night, it's Friday night, and there are so many great things about it. But I think it's important to do it with intention, and intention is really the big piece. Having boundaries in place. I love how you talk with your kids about how it makes them feel. That's something that I've learned in my reading as well. That's important to check in with them. Tackling it as a family so that kids really feel heard in the process it has been big for our family, making it a family thing so that, when my kids don't actually even have a cell phone, they're still seeing how to live with one through the way that my husband and I use them. Yes. So when they are using them, they've been like, oh, I know I don't pull a cell phone out at the table, even though I don't have a cell phone, So really taking it as a family view on it. I think
you're teaching it by example, right? They're seeing how it is that you do it, which is how everything is actually taught to our kids. We can say all we want to say, but they're going to do what we do. Exactly.
It's huge. I think another piece of it that I really try to focus on too with my parents is focusing on the actual relationship with my kids, having things that you do as a family that links you to them. You have to spend time with our kids in order to have a relationship with them. So like we do one-on-one dates with our kids. They go on a date with one of us every month. Our Sundays, we have our family meetings. We go through what our week is going to look like. We go through we have each person share a highlight of the last week, a hard part about their week, and something they're looking forward to. Just kind of really check in with everybody as a family, having things that your family does that creates culture in your family so that they have a relationship with you, that you have more influence on your kids than the things they see online, than the people they're with at school. Friends are important, but that family connection needs to be there. So that's a piece of it, I think, as well, is having a good relationship with them. And then another thing I really encourage parents when they start to learn about this is to really pick one or two things, tiny things to change, and just start with that. Don't try to bite off everything. Don't like, oh, we're getting rid of it all. Maybe it's realizing how many hours you're on and cutting back slowly for a while. Or maybe it's we're taking all the screens out of the bedrooms. That's what we're doing right now. And you focus on your sleep routine, or just finding one or two things, and you start with that, and you just make little changes slowly over time, instead of I don't know, being so full of fear that you're just like
getting rid of everything. And I think it's the energy behind the intention that you're setting as far as the boundary goes, right? Boundaries are always best if you're not making them from fear or shame or guilt. So if you're feeling that way and you've just read a bunch of literature and you're just like, oh my goodness, I'm taking away all of these things because my kids are going to like grow a third eye and like whatever because of all of this stuff. Just give yourself some time to just kind of like relax and to move that emotion through your body, and then decide like, okay, what can I do? Because it is usually those small, simple things over time. And I found when we did a reset, it wasn't like, hey, we're getting rid of screens altogether. Let's just like see how it goes. Let's just do it for a small amount of time. Or if it's for me, like I don't do a reset from everything. I might just like delete Instagram or Facebook from my phone or something for a while. So just noticing how it makes you feel and making those boundaries and those decisions from like a good, healthy space. And I love how you said, making sure that the relationship with your kids is the focus too, because if it's not, then none of this is going to work anyways. They're not going to listen to what you have to say. They're not going to care what it is that you're modeling. So making sure that relationship with them is always the biggest focus.
And I think another hopeful thought for me that I learned eventually is our brains are incredible. They will heal too, and they will heal quickly. So to not feel like you just totally ruined your kids, because neuroplasticity is a real thing. Like one of the studies they share in Glow Kids is they took, I think they were like 18 to 25-year-old males who really didn't have much exposure to video games. They did a brain scan of everybody before Then they split the group into two, and one group played for 10 hours that week, video games, and the other group didn't play at all. And then they scanned everybody's brain again. They could see that the people who had been playing video games, their frontal lobe had been affected. They could see the changes in it already after 1 week. They then had them play no video games for 1 week, scanned them all again, and their brains were already starting to heal from it. So it's amazing. Like, from what I've read, the two things that promote neuroplasticity most is exercise and sleep. So if you can start with little boundaries, I think a great place to start for families is sleeping and bedtime. Get tech out of the bedroom, actually have a bedtime, and then no screens 1 hour before bedtime. Start with that if you start with anything, and then go from there. And I think people will see that, change is possible if they feel like that needs to happen, and to not just lose hope and get so discouraged that, well, we're in too far, there's nothing I can do about it. I think any little change over time makes a difference.
That's such good advice. I think we'll end there. I think that you've given us a lot to think about. And I love the idea of just small and simple changes, focusing on relationship, focusing on something little. And it's funny because just this week I was writing down, like, I've been feeling a little bit more irritable and a little bit less motivated lately and changing and whatever. And so I kind of wrote down, like, what do I think would be best for me? And one of them was like, I need to do like less screens before bed. Like, I need to have a break between screens and bed. And I know that I feel so much better. I sleep so much better. My brain just feels so much more calm and more relaxed. So this is exactly the conversation I needed for my own self.
Oh, good. We all need the reminder, myself included. It's ongoing. We can't do everything perfect. So we do the best we can.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Kaylee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And will you share where people can connect with you?
Sure. So they can find me at book_cram on Instagram. And that's where I work through books that I found helpful, and I work through them chapter by chapter and just pull my favorite snippets from every chapter to try and help people get to reading when they can't get to reading. So that's where I do that. And then I have an email, Intentionalwithtech, at gmail.com, if they have any questions. In our community, I've started doing presentations for parent groups and church groups and some students. So, So
if you're in Alberta, you can.
You're in Alberta. That's right.
I guess maybe she'll go other places too, but
we'll see.
We'll see.
See what lies ahead.
All right. Thank you, Kaylee.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to help spread this work to the world, share this episode on social media and tag me. Send it to a friend or leave a quick rating and review below so more people can find me. If you'd like more guidance on your own parenting journey, reach out.